Welcome back. In today's video, we are going to discuss about demography and family planning. The objectives of today's session is definition of demography, demographic process, and demographic cycle. In the upcoming videos, we will be discussing about the demographic indicators, National Family Health Survey NFHS 4, sample registration system and civil registration system. Let us start with demography. Definition: demography is divided into two demos. Demos means population and graphy means study. So demography is nothing but the scientific study of the population. You are studying the population. Graphy is the population. Demos is the study. Now let us see. As understood today, it is the scientific study of the human population which focuses its attention on the population size, composition of population and distribution of the population. So we see that the total attention of this demographic study is based on the observable human phenomena, that is change in the population size, the change in the population composition, and also the last one, that is the distribution of the population in a space, and the third one is distribution of the population in the space. What are the sources of this demographic statistics? They are census, national sample surveys, demographic studies, etc. So we saw the sources, that is census, surveys and the different demographic studies. Moving on to demographic process. To understand the demographic process, let us make it into a type of a short story. Here they are saying that it comprises of 5 processes, that is marriage, migration, social mobility, fertility and mortality. So a poor girl, okay, she is a poor girl. She got married. The first one is marriage. She got married to a rich guy. She got married to a rich guy. She got married. And then she migrated from her home to his home. So there was migration. Marriage, migration. And social mobility. Social mobility is nothing but change in the socio-economic status of an individual or family over a period of time. So by marrying this rich guy, there was a change in the social mobility. The mobility, that is social mobility, is nothing but from the poor socio-economic, it increased into a higher socio-economic, from the low socio-economic to the higher socio-economic. There is change in the socio-economic status of an individual or a particular family over a period of time. Then comes fertility. Later on she gave birth to a baby. So then comes fertility and last comes the death. So it's very clear, guys. That's marriage, migration, social mobility, fertility and mortality. So with this we complete the demographic process. Now let us move on to the demographic cycle. The 5 stages of demographic transitions are given here. They are, now we can remember it with the help of a mnemonic, that is HELD. You know, that girl, she got married to a rich guy, right? So that rich guy, and then she gave birth to a girl baby. Because of giving birth to a girl baby, there was a lot of gender discrimination done there in her family. So her life became hell, and finally she suicided and died. Death. Okay, so we saw that it is HELD. HELL and D. So when they ask you about define demography, the what are the sources? the processes and the cycle. Remember, demography is the study of the population. Then we saw the sources like census, sample surveys, and demographic studies. Then we saw the processes: marriage, migration, social mobility, fertility, and later on what happens after fertility: decline or death. The last thing is like mortality. Then the five stages what we saw, they are high, HELLD. Now let us focus on these. What are the five stages? We have high stationary and low stationary. They are high stationary and low stationary, early expanding and late expanding, and the last one is decline. You can also remember in this way: early and late expanding, high stationary, low stationary, and the fifth one is decline. So let us understand each of these demographic cycles in detail. The first one is high stationary. In high stationary, there is a high birth rate and death rate. So the population is remaining stationary. So let us take an example here of 100 babies being born and 100 people dying. So there is net increase in population is 0. So it is a stationary. 100 were born, 100 died. So the increase is 0. The population remains stationary. Lots of young population is observed in a high stationary phase. Pyramidal shaped age pyramid. You can see the age pyramid here in high stationary. It is pyramidal shaped. India followed this high stationary phase until 1920. In 1921, the big divide, the declining death rate started, and the India landed into stage 2. So you see that, guys. Let us summarize. In high stationary, birth rate is equal to the death rate. So the population, for example, 10 or 100 were born, 10 died. It nullified. The increase in population was 0. And India was in this stage until 1920. In 1921, now let us see what happened in 1921. The death rate started to decline and the birth rate were increasing. So we see that for example, now birth rate 10 babies are born, the dead are only 5. So the net increase in population is 5. Totally still 5 people. Now if 10 out of 10, if 10 were being born, if 10 were eliminated, if 10 entered and 10 eliminated, it would be stationary. 10 entered but only 5 were eliminated. So the remaining 5 are adding the population. The remaining 5 were not eliminated. I hope it's clear. Now we are moving on to the early expanding, the second transition cycle, that is early expanding, in which the birth rate is unchanged, that is high. It means that here the birth rate is unchanged. It means it is high only. But the death rate is declining. We saw this while explaining the death rate declining in stage 2 in India. I have told you, again let us repeat. So birth rate is increased as it is and the death rate is gradually declining. So the population is slowly increasing and expanding. Young population is observed. The losing pyramidal shape age pyramid. So we see the age pyramid losing pyramidal shape. Pyramidal shape was like this. Now it is losing the pyramidal shape and becoming kind of triangular. It is seen in Africa and South Asia. So let us see this again. Birth rate is increasing, death rate is declining. Birth rate, let us consider 10 babies were born, death are only 5. So the net increase in population was, out of 10, here if the 10 were eliminated, then there won't be an increase, but only 5 are eliminated. So 5 are still adding on to the population and increasing them. Moving on to the next transition phase, that is late expanding. In late expanding, what happens? The birth rate is declining, decreasing, but the death rate declines further, such that the number of births are still higher, total deaths, so the population is still increasing or expanding. Now with this, if you don't understand, I will give you the examples so you can understand it better. So see guys, the birth rate, the birth rate is declining. Let us consider, out of usually what 10 babies were being born, right? Here only 9 are being born, one less. So we see that birth rate has declined, but the death rate is also declining, but 6 of them are dying. So what happens? Net increase in population, it is still more. Even though the birth rate is decreasing, it is not decreasing to a such extent that it can nullify the death rate and birth rate, and stationary population cannot be attained. Only little birth rate is reducing, but the death rate declines further, such that number of births are still higher than the total death rate. You see, 9 are the birth rates, total death rates are only 6. The number of birth rate is still higher compared to the death rate. Birth rates are 9. It means that the birth rate, even though it is declining, it is still higher compared to the death rate. Young population is observed, and the shape of the pyramid is globular shaped. So you can see the globular shaped pyramid here in the late expanding phase. This type of transition phase is observed in India, in China, Singapore and other developing countries. So in India, the birth rate is declining, but not to such an extent as comparable to the death rate. Death rate is also declining, but birth rate is just little, it has declined. So as a result, the total increase in population is still observed. Next, low stationary phase. Birth rate and death rate are now both low. So zero population growth is seen. Now what happens in low stationary? Again the word stationary is coming up. So the birth rate, death rate both are low. Only 2 babies are being born and 2 people are dying. The rate is low. The intensity, the number, okay, the quantity is low, but it is equal. Low birth rate, low death rate. So what happens? There will be zero population growth, and the mixed population is seen in them. Cylindrical shape age pyramid. So you can see the fourth pyramid, that is globular, third one, and fourth one is cylindrical shape. It is seen in Austria. So we see, guys, in Austria, zero population growth has been recorded during 1980 and 85. Growth rate as little as 0.1 were also recorded in Denmark, Sweden, Belgium, UK during 1980s and 85. In short, we see that the industrialized countries have undergone this transition from stage 1 to stage 4. Now we move on to the last transition phase, that is declining. So what's happening in declining? In declining, birth rate declines further. Birth rate is declining further, such that number of births are now less than total deaths. So we see that death rate is 10 and the birth rate is just 1. So we see that the birth rate is declined further, such that number of births are less than the total deaths. So the population is beginning to decline. 10 people are eliminated, but only 1 is added. So what happens? The 9 are less. So it is, population is declining. It's not stationary, it's not increasing, rather it is declining. Aged population are observed. So we see that birth rate is only 1. Birth was only 1, but the death was 10. So the new generation or new population being added is very low. Aged population is observed in this type of transition phase. There is a losing cylindrical aged pyramid. So the cylindrical shape is being lost here. It is seen in Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Japan, Bulgaria, Eastern Europe countries. So we see that the highest longevity is also seen in Japan, where people, the males live up to the age of 87, and then females up to the age of 89 or something. So when we study about the indicators, we will deal about these values in more details. For now, remember, in the declining phase, the aged population is seen and the birth rate is way too less compared to the death rates. Now let us summarize each of these, okay? In the high stationary, what happened, guys? In the high stationary, first thing, birth rate was equal to death rate, 0 population stationary. In the second, birth rate was increased and death rate started declining. So 10 people were not dying. So what happened? Death rate was declining, so population increased. In the third, birth rate started to decrease, but it was such an extent that the death rate declining was more compared to the birth rate. Birth rate was still higher compared to the death rates. They were still higher, even though declining, they were still higher compared to the death rate. Now we are moving on to the low stationary phase, wherein both birth rate death rate were low. Last, declining, birth rate was very low compared to the death rates. So we see a decline in the population. So with this we end the transition, the demographic cycle. In the next video we'll be discussing about the indicators and moving on with the remaining topics. Thank you. I hope it is clear. If you have any doubts, put it in the comment section, and please do like and subscribe.